Hello. Today I'd like to share a story with you. This story is called The Miracle of the Red Egg. This is a book about St. Mary Magdalene and about her sharing the good news that Christ is risen. And we have this book at our house because Amelia's godparents gave it to her one year at Pascha. Let's read it. The Miracle of the Red Egg by Elizabeth Crispina Johnson. Mary Magdalene draped her scarf over her hair as she hurried to the door. For months since Emperor Tiberius had moved to the island of Capri, she'd hoped and prayed that she would have a chance to meet with him. Now at last she had an invitation to attend a banquet at his villa. She'd spent the last few days praying that while she was there, she would be able to tell him the good news, the news that Jesus Christ is risen. Mary hastily threw her cloak around her shoulders and set off. But now that she was on her way, she felt her heart beat with both excitement and fear. People were afraid of Emperor Tiberius. Little things often sent him into rages. He had people thrown into prison and even killed simply because he was angry. Mary Magdalene wondered, if she did have the chance to speak with the emperor, what would he say? What would he do? Mary hurried along the streets. She marveled at the beauty around her. Majestic cliffs along the shoreline, vineyards and olive groves making beautiful counterpane patterns in the landscape, and hills jutting up toward the beautiful blue sky. As she breathed in the salty sea air, she felt her worry ebb away. God would answer her prayers. All would be well. And with a peaceful heart, she arrived at the villa. There, a servant led Mary to one of the terraces facing the sea, where the table was already set for the meal. She took her place and saw Emperor Tiberius already reclining on one of the couches at the head of the table. Servants began to carry in dish after dish, overflowing with the most wonderful foods. Baskets of sweet, juicy grapes, bowls filled with delicious nuts and dates, meat and fish and cheese and eggs and all sorts of honey cakes and sweets. Soon the table was laden with every delicacy imaginable. As they ate, everyone laughed and talked together. Mary told the people seated next to her about the wonderful news of Jesus' resurrection. Even if she couldn't get an opportunity to talk to Emperor Tiberius about it, she could at least tell his guests. Word spread from one person to the next like ripples in water. Someone had seen Jesus alive after his crucifixion. Finally, Mary Magdalene's story reached the very end of the table where Emperor Tiberius sat. His voice rang out over all the others. So what is this I hear? One of you claims that man, Jesus of Nazareth, has come back to life? Ridiculous! Everyone fell silent, all thinking the same thing. No good would come from talking with the emperor about Jesus. Whenever Jesus was mentioned, people started arguing. They argued about the things he had done. They argued about the things he had said. And most of all, they argued about whether or not he had really risen from the dead. And no one wanted to argue with the emperor about that. Emperor Tiberius leaned forward. I've heard people say that Jesus rose from the dead, but it's absurd. He laughed again, more loudly this time. No one can just come back to life. I don't believe it. Mary Magdalene prayed for courage and stood up. What you have heard is true, she said. I went to Jesus' tomb, and there I saw 2 angels. They told me not to be afraid, and then I turned and I saw Jesus. I saw him and I talked with him. The resurrection is true. Emperor Tiberius opened his mouth, but no words came. Mary Magdalene saw his face turn red and then redder. He slammed his fist down on the table so hard that the dishes rattled. "It cannot be true," he shouted. He grabbed an egg from the table and jumped to his feet. "Do you see this egg?" he said. He strode around the room, shaking his fist. "I declare that Jesus can no more have risen from the dead than this egg." He held it up high above his head for all to see. "Then this egg could turn blood red here and now in my hand." He glared at his guests, but they were not looking at the emperor. They were staring at the egg. Slowly, Emperor Tiberius shifted his gaze. He gasped, and his face turned white. There was the egg. Deep, rich, red for all to see. It was a miracle. A miracle of a red egg proclaiming that Jesus truly was risen from the dead. Slowly, ever so slowly, he set the egg down on the table and backed away. The emperor sat down and put his head in his hands. He sat very still and let out a long, low moan. Oh, a red egg, a miracle, and above all, a resurrection. "Leave me," he said in a hoarse whisper. With faces filled with awe and fear, the guests pushed and jostled their way out of the room, whispering about the miracle they had just seen. But as they all left, Mary Magdalene stayed behind. Carefully, she picked up the precious egg, and cradling it in her hands, she held it to her heart. "It is true," she said one last time as she turned to leave. "Christ is risen." Emperor Tiberius looked up at her, and she wondered if maybe she saw his expression soften just a little. And from that day forward, and forever, Mary Magdalene gave thanks to God for the courage he had given her and for the wondrous, marvelous miracle of the red